Do you guys hear that? I swear every time I sit down to record a video, this type of shit happens down the street. But anyway, hi, I'm Esin, and I review stuff, and it is time for another album review. This time, I'm going to be talking about the sophomore release of an international atmospheric black metal band that has its members both in Finland and Netherlands. The album that I am talking about is Iku-Turso's Pakana. Iku-Turso is a relatively young band that first came onto the scene in 2017 with their first full-length release, The Great Tower. 3 years, 2 splits, and an EP after that, the band has released their new full-length titled Pakana and unleashed it upon the world. Now, the music that is contained within Pakana is a slightly slower, more dirge-like variation, oh thank God. Iku-Turso's music is a slower rendition of atmospheric black metal that prefers a steady-paced, even-paced tracks of standard length to churning out epic after epic spanning 7 minutes plus, as the genre is wont to do. In terms of more basic elements, you have your black metal style riffs that often flirt with depressive suicidal variations of the genre and brings you these moody, dark, melancholic, and mournful melodies. The bass and the drums usually keep it simple and keep it steady, and as a result of this be more impactful than they would have been if they were full of improvisation. All of this is backed by glossy keyboards, both bringing atmospheres and, when the music calls for it, extra elements to the table, and the bow is tied with these throaty, croaking, screaming black metal style vocals laid on top of it all. Now, all of this is par for the course if you are talking about atmospheric black metal, which Iku-Turso are the purveyors of, and as a result of this, Pakana usually busies itself painting this bleak and desolate landscape that you as the listener is getting lost in. It's a vast, sprawling plain that once used to be green, where the skies are always gray, the air is always dark and damp and cold, and you are always lost. The band actually, in order to paint this vivid picture of this particular landscape, starts out the album by bringing folk influences to the table. In fact, the initial track plays like a folkier rendition of a black metal track than a black metal track with folk influences thrown in. Unfortunately, this is just a bait and switch tactic because the rest of the album does not play on these influences as I hoped that they would, and instead indulges in the more or less standard Atmoblack fanfare. Now, when I say standard, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I don't mean to say that after this magnificent opener, and it is a magnificent opener, mind you, Pakana just succumbs to churning out the same song over and over and over again. There are identifiable trends that run through the entire tracklist of this album, but the same song and the same thing does not repeat twice, or at least does not repeat twice exactly. Let me try to explain to you what I mean by getting a little bit deeper into the track list. Right after the magnificent opener, the name of which I'm not even going to bother trying to pronounce correctly because I know I'm not going to be able to, the band hits us with Bellum, which more or less serves as the actual introduction to the rest of the album. Bellum features black metal stylings of a purer strain with more aggression and faster paced riffs being brought forward, even though the song then makes the transition into more keyboard heavy passages and decides to drive the mood deeper rather than pushing the aggression up. It is more in the vein of the music that you're going to be finding on Pakana from there on out. And then the band switches gears to a more dirge-like, slower song, Ashes, which has in common with a later song, Funnus, the addition of strings as a secondary instrument to the more melancholic and darker and slower black metal stylings. In fact, the second of these two tracks, Funnus, actually flirts with being a bona fide depressive suicidal black metal track with the way that it delves into the depression, or at least the feeling of depression that it is conjuring up with every passing note. You see, this is the point at which I started feeling like Pakana's tracklist wasn't exploring the vast environment that I described at the beginning of this review with more or less colorful language. Rather than taking you from point A to point B and taking you out on a journey across this landscape, Pakana's tracklist more or less feels like you are going in circles around the same place and only recognizing this fact when you arrive at the beginning. Just like how the tracks Ashes and Funnus are paired in terms of their mood, their pace, the themes they explore, and the secondary instruments they use, the tracks Ultionis and Wanderer are likewise paired by their pace, which is faster, by their groundwork, which is a purer strain and therefore more aggressive form of black metal, and by the secondary influences they incorporate, which is symphonic black metal. In both Ultionis and Wanderer, you have these atmospheric, mood-setting keyboards that bring the gloss on top of the raw, more potent black metal, but in both cases, the keyboards just venture into orchestral bombast, bringing the symphonic elements forward. And as a result of this, while the two songs are distinctive enough, they do feel like they are exploring similar territories, which contributes to the feeling of going in circles. Now, at this point, it must be mentioned that Iku-Turso's songwriting is their saving grace. The band is indisputably talented with their instruments, and their riff craft is spot on. Even though Ultionis and Wanderer and Ashes and Funnus are explore similar territories with similar instrumentation enough to be parallels to each other, the band manages to imbue each of these tracks with their own distinctive identities, so that even if played back to back, it would be impossible to confuse one for the other. And it's not as if Pakana is just a one-note album that is consisting entirely of paired tracks. There is, for example, the track Solace, which uses a flute as a secondary instrument, and it marks a very welcome change from what you have heard on the album so far. And being able to bring such tiny changes and make them count is undeniably a strength of this album. Now, all that said, Pakana is not a perfect album. In fact, it is pretty far from being perfect. There is 3 distinctive weaknesses of this album that keep it from reaching even greater heights that I believe the band's skills would allow them to. The first, unfortunately, is the vocals. Vocals are easily the weakest part of this album, apart from the production, which I'm going to talk about in a second. The vocals are monotonous. There's just no way around this. The guy can croak, and he can croak rather well, but he cannot croak with any kind of variety. It is just the same croaking across the board, start to finish, on every song and throughout the album. And this becomes especially jarring during softer passages like the transitional points of Bellum, where the instrumentation sort of goes for a quiet approach, but the vocals refuse to comply with the overall change in atmosphere. Where the songs shift in terms of their moods or tempos, or go from harder to softer, and overall shift around, the vocals do not budge. And as a result of this, more often than not, the vocals work against the music rather than in harmony with it, and can be quite grating to listen to. The second biggest weakness of Pakana is undoubtedly its production. I know that I constantly advocate for black metal albums to retain some of the rawness of the music when being produced, but Pakana just doesn't feature a production that would allow the music to reach its full potential. It is decidedly underproduced, and as a result of this, the sound may be really raw, but it is also very undercooked. It doesn't help that in terms of instrumentation, the guitars and the keyboards do most of the heavy lifting, and in the mix, those are the elements that are the most prominent, which results in the drums and the bass being pushed back far more than they should have been. And furthermore, Pakana features a rather limited Furthermore, as I was saying before whatever that was happened, Pakana's use of stereo space is extremely limited to the point where most of the album takes place in the center, which cuts into the immersion factor quite a bit. This is Atmoblack. As per the name, it thrives on the moods and immersive atmospheres that it builds, but that is severely impacted when you squeeze the listener into this tiny little space. Had the album been more expensive with its use of stereo space, had it enveloped the listener with sound from all directions, it would have been a lot more evocative than it currently is. The third major weakness of Pakana is its structure, specifically the fact that the final track, Wanderer, is basically sandwiched between two acoustic interludes, neither of which really serve much of a purpose other than being pleasant sounding acoustic interludes. Another aspect of this is that these interludes introduce a repetitive structure at the tail end of this album, which causes things to ramp down instead of ramp up like they should have been. The album ends on an acoustic interlude, full song, acoustic interlude, full song kind of way, and given that this album is only 9 tracks long, it takes away a lot from the way that the album was flowing until that point. Now, all of that said, however, it is undeniable that Iku-Turso's Pakana is a good album. It is actually a very good album. It is just kept from being great because of these few but important shortcomings. Now, I don't have any doubts in my mind that the band is very talented, that they know how to write songs, they know how to write riffs, and most importantly, they know how to construct an atmosphere. And as a result of this, I think they are capable of much greater things than what we are hearing on this particular album. So as it stands, Pakana is a very good album that is well worth a listen, but it is not, I think, the apex of what Iku-Turso is capable of achieving. I would recommend this album to fans of atmospheric black metal, those who like a little bit of moodiness in their black, those who like somewhat folk adjacent and pastoral moods in their metal music, and I think, honest to goodness, DSBM fans can also get a kick out of this. For everybody else, I think there are some other albums that you better check out before getting to this one, because as a gateway, Iku-Turso's Pakana is a little bit lacking. So there's a Bandcamp link in the description down below. Why don't you click that, go listen for yourself, and then if you think that I am dead fucking wrong, you can come back and tell me about it. If you like my content, please like, comment, and subscribe, as it always helps. And as always, until next time, it's Esin. Peace out.